There is an old fable about a goose who strutted across a common, boasting to a nearby horse. She pointed out that she could walk on the ground, fly through the air, and swim across the ponds. She operated in three entirely different domains. The horse, entirely unimpressed, pointed out the obvious flaw. The goose could fly, but only heavily and clumsily. She could swim, but could not dive for food like a fish. She waddled awkwardly on the ground. The horse explained that he would rather be built for absolute, graceful perfection in a single environment than be mediocre in all three. We live in an era that worships the goose. The prevailing advice is to diversify your skills, build multiple streams of income, constantly network, and keep all of your options open. But dividing your attention comes with a severe mechanical penalty. Constantly moving from one shallow pursuit to another guarantees that you will never dig deep enough to strike a rich, enduring resource. You spend all your energy transitioning between tasks, rather than mastering any of them. In the mechanics of power, intensity defeats extensity every time. Spreading your forces wide does not make you adaptable, it makes you highly vulnerable. In the early 6th century BC, the Chinese kingdom of Wu engineered a war to elevate its cultural and political status. The king decided to aggressively expand outward, fighting the neighboring northern provinces across several different fronts simultaneously. This map reveals Wu's fatal flaw. Pushing outward in multiple directions thinned the king's defensive lines. Every time troops pushed north, it pulled resources from the rear. The rival U.S. state exploited this weakness, marched through the unguarded southern border, and surrounded the palace. Now look at the exact opposite approach. In 18th century Europe, the Rothschild family began building their banking empire from the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt. Harsh local laws prevented them from mingling outside, so they turned extreme physical and social limitation into an asset. They looked inward. They centralized their operations entirely within the family. They communicated using a highly complex Frankfurt Yiddish code that outsiders could not decipher. And as the five sons expanded the business into London, Paris, and Vienna, they maintained their cohesion by arranging 16 of their 18 marriages entirely between first cousins. Surrounding European empires expanded, fractured, and fell to revolution. The Rothschilds operated like a single, impenetrable mechanism, slowly absorbing the wealth of a chaotic continent without ever diluting their internal network. Large-scale success obeys a strict physical law. Systems that bloat beyond their natural proportions inevitably collapse under their own weight. Tightly concentrated, coherent networks endure. This same law scales down to individual career strategy. The modern ideal is total independence, working for yourself, refusing to be tied to a single boss, and floating freely between opportunities. The brilliant inventor Nikola Tesla actively pursued this kind of ultimate independence. He refused to sign a highly lucrative contract that would have bound his work to a single backer, believing it would limit his freedom. That backer was J.P. Morgan. By rejecting a single powerful patron, Tesla spent the latter half of his life financially ruined, forced to constantly beg for scraps of capital from dozens of minor investors. By contrast, Renaissance masters traded total independence for focused leverage. Michelangelo willingly tied his loyalty to Pope Julius II. Concentrating his effort on one immensely powerful patron guaranteed him the massive resources, materials, and protection he needed to execute his visions. The adventurer Casanova applied this exact principle to psychological seduction. He attributed his legendary success not to broad charm, but to intense, obsessive focus. For months at a time, he gave his attention entirely to a single target, ignoring everyone else in his orbit, until she yielded. Total individual freedom is a paradox. You rarely achieve it by spreading your bets and trying to please everyone. You achieve it by intensely affixing yourself to one appropriate, highly resourced source of power. Are there tactical scenarios where intense concentration becomes a fatal liability? Yes. Dispersion is the mandatory weapon of the weaker side. Mao Zedong fought the nationalists using the core principles of guerrilla warfare. When facing a stronger, concentrated army, you dissolve into the environment. You scatter your forces to frustrate the enemy with elusiveness. Relying on a single patron also carries a specific, localized risk. It creates a single point of failure. If that patron leaves, falls from grace, or dies, your entire foundation vanishes instantly. Cesar Borgia built his massive military dominance entirely on the protection and wealth of his father, Pope Alexander VI. When the Pope suddenly died, Borgia was left completely exposed to the many enemies he had made, and his power dissolved almost overnight. But unless you are severely outmatched and forced to fight a guerrilla war, diffusion is a guaranteed weakness. The solution to a world entirely built on distraction is to retreat inward. You align your mind and your physical energy entirely with a single goal, piercing the target precisely at its weakest point. You do not need to dig 100 shallow holes to find success. You only need to strike oil once to secure a lifetime of power.